There, I'm journeying down the Republican National Committee gathering in South Orange County, California, where I expect Rhonda McDaniel to be reelected chair of the Republican National Committee. I'll report back on Monday, but I needed a guest host, and I looked around and there weren't any. So I asked Duane, how about you try this after 23 years? And he's been doing the after show for 23 years, and he's been talking to me on the air for 23 years. So we agreed to throw caution to the wind, and I never thought I'd say it, but take it away, Duane.
Well, welcome, America. Thank you, Hugh. Yes, we are throwing caution to the wind today. I am hosting for today and tomorrow. Great to have you with us. My name is Duane Patterson. I have produced this show since the very first day it was on the air. I am a VIP columnist over at hotair.com. I've got a pretty decent following over at Twitter at Radio Blogger. I can swim in this pond of politics with the best of them. I'm glad to have you here. We're going to do the rundown in just a second. It's one of those days where you could go any number of directions as far as what the news has to offer. And we're going to go in a lot of different places. But one of the central things we're going to come back to is the fact that the former chairman of the House Intel Committee, Adam Schiff, from right up the road here in Southern California. Adam Schiff, after having been banned by Speaker Kevin McCarthy, as is his prerogative to do on any select committee, it's up to the whim of the speaker to decide who gets to sit and not sit on select committees, Intel being one of them. It partially in response to what Nancy Pelosi did with the J6 committee, booting off Jim Banks and booting off Jim Jordan and placing people that she wanted as the acceptable conservatives, the acceptable Republicans, breaking all historical norms, breaking all of the history of the House, where the minority did not get a chance to put who they wanted on the select committee. No, we are in unprecedented times. If you listen to legacy media, we are in unprecedented times. If you watched the Three Amigos press conference yesterday, the Three Amigos being the aforementioned Adam Schiff, Eric Honeypot Swalwell, and Ilhan Omar, Representative Omar, who has been bounced off of armed services. And the three of them held a press conference, but then Adam Schiff took it to a whole nother level. He was like Emerald. He kicked it up a notch. He took to TikTok. Yes, the app that we're trying to ban in this country because it is basically a spy apparatus of the CCP, the Communist Chinese government. It is an intelligence gathering operation of the CCP. And Adam Schiff, the former chair of House Intel, has decided, I need to whine and complain and try to fundraise off of the CCP's favorite platform. It's otherworldly. It is beyond surreal. We'll get to that in a second, but let's do the rundown quickly. According to Luke Broadwater, who is the New York Times, one of the New York Times congressional reporters, Speaker McCarthy has just confirmed today that he did indeed speak with Senator Joe Manchin, and cuts to Social Security and Medicare are off the table as part of any debt ceiling negotiations. So I'm not sure what they're going to actually negotiate. I'm not sure what cuts in spending they're going to do, but Speaker McCarthy signaled they're not going to touch the third rail, certainly not in the first week of doing, real legislative work in the House once they got all the stand-up committee business done. So we'll see what that looks like in the near future. Ukraine Watch. We are going to now send 35 tanks to Ukraine, 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Now, this is welcome news. I am right there with Hugh in this, in that I would much rather disarm Russia through proxy than have to tackle them head on. And then if we give a few tanks to Ukraine, that's a small price to pay in the overall relative scheme of things. If it keeps Ukraine on the plus side of the ledger against Russia and further degrades Russia's military capability. I'm all for that. What I have a problem with is the White House spin on this, which, like the White House spin is on virtually everything, it's atrocious. Joe Biden came out yesterday, and we'll go into this in a little bit deeper dive a little bit later on. But Joe Biden came out in a press conference and announced that he is going to give these tanks to Ukraine. And that's fine. But this is exactly the opposite of what their policy was even a week ago. We weren't going to do that, said this administration. And all of a sudden, Germany, France, other NATO countries decided they were going to send tanks because they didn't think we were going to keep it up. And it kind of shamed this administration into going ahead and doing the right thing. Tom Cotton reflected on it to Trace Gallagher and Sandra Smith over at Fox News. Here is what Tom Cotton said, cut 6, Jacob.
Sandra, it's a welcome decision that President Biden and Germany have decided to finally provide these tanks to Ukraine, but it's long overdue. It also continues a pattern since before the war started of President Biden being scared of his own shadow, of declining the military support that the Ukrainian army needs, first to deter the war from starting in the first place, and then second to defend Ukrainian territory and to fight back against Russia's unprovoked war of aggression. And it's really an admission of their own mistakes not providing these tanks months ago, as you've seen time and time again for the last year, when the administration explains that some kind of weapon system or a certain kind of intelligence would be dangerously escalatory or provocative, only to provide it months later, too late for it to have been used to stop further advances or to facilitate further Ukrainian advances. So what we need to do to end this war, to stop it from being any more protracted or bloodier, is to back Ukraine's army to the hilt so they can defend their own territory.
So Tom Cotton's exactly right. It's not bad what Joe Biden did here. It's good what Joe Biden did. The problem is it's a furtherance, it's a continuance of the Barack Obama policy of leading from behind. You come dragging, kicking, and screaming to it, but what is maddening is at the White House yesterday, Joe Biden tried to proclaim, well, this was the plan all along. Cut number 10, Jacob.
Mr. President, why are you taking this decision now? Did Germany force you to change your mind on sending tanks?
Germany didn't force me to change your mind. We wanted to make sure we were all together. That's what we're going to do all along. And that's what we're doing right now. Thanks.
Mr. President.
No, that's not actually true. And you know who has said that? The New York Times has said that. The New York Times even writes this morning that, well, technically, actually, this is a bit of a reversal of policy. Now, you don't get the angst and the invective from the New York Times when a policy reversal happens, like they would say if Donald Trump reversed policy or George W. Bush or insert Republican president here did a reversal of policy. They would have a conniption fit over it. But everybody in the town knows that Biden is done a 180 on this. And when the president comes out and says, well, this was the plan all along, the media should have pushed back and said, that's not true, sir. Why can't you just say, hey, I had a second think about it, and why are they going along with the lie? Because it makes us look like we're not serious on the world stage. It is a problem. The Washington Post has an editorial today. Speaker McCarthy may regret kicking Adam Schiff off of the House Intel Committee. I went back doing my exhaustive research for the program this morning to find the op-ed from the editorial board in the past of the Washington Post where they said that Speaker Pelosi would regret kicking Jim Jordan off of the J6 Select Committee. And I had a hard time finding that editorial. I'm sure just because the legacy media is totally fair, I'm sure that editorial is back there somewhere. I spent a long time looking for it. I didn't find it. I don't know why I couldn't find it, but I'm sure it's back there somewhere. Look, we're going to have a lot more for you today. We're going to come back and we're going to play a little bit of Adam Schiff and the Three Amigos conference as the hour progresses and throughout the day. And especially we're going to play the TikTok video. I cannot believe that Adam Schiff took to TikTok to complain he got thrown off of House Intel. If anything screams admission against interest, Adam Schiff would be it. This is Duane Patterson filling in for Hugh Hewitt.
Your testimony to your Christian faith throughout and every given inch is pervasive and persuasive, and I encourage people to read it. I want to go, though, to the opposite of good Christian faith. There's only one guy in the world who's dealt with Putin, Xi, and Kim as much as President Trump, and that's you. You've actually dealt more with Putin, Xi, and Kim, more than Biden has dealt with them. And so on the scale of despicables, who's more despicable, Xi, Putin, or Khamenei, or Kim?
Oh, goodness. You're splitting hairs now, Hugh. All pretty bad. I don't think about them from personality characteristics other than to try and figure out what might avoid tripping their trigger when we didn't want to and to trip it when we did. We always focused on what are their capabilities? What's the risk? How do we solve for that? And what risk are we prepared to take to make sure we get deterrence established and keep America safe? Different characters, all with very different backgrounds, but they share some common characteristics. Each of them understands that the one nation that is indispensable to take down, to achieve their ultimate objectives, is the United States of America. And second, they understand American leadership and strength. And when they don't see it, when they see the inverse of that, weakness, fecklessness, inattention, the absence of focus, the inability to actually lead coalitions across the world in ways that matter, when they see that, they're gonna make advances. We saw it with Putin in Ukraine. We've seen it with Xi Jinping as he continues to move about Africa and South America. We see it with Chairman Kim today as he's launching missiles at a rate that is absolutely historic. It exceeds even what he did under President Obama. American leadership can resolve many of these things. We can make America more secure. And each of those leaders, including Khamenei, who we didn't speak to, each of those leaders understands American power. And we demonstrated our willingness to use it in a way that didn't put 60, 80, 100,000 American lives at risk. This is the best of American foreign policy.
The disclosures about Putin that you make are fascinating to me. I've already told the story, because it wasn't on media and I didn't break the embargo, that Putin brought dogs to meet Angela Merkel because dogs scared Angela Merkel. And he was keeping you waiting because you're an impatient fella. Putin, it sounds about as ruthless and as cold as they come. What is he the least likable, not dangerous, but just least likable of these four? You haven't met Khamenei.
I have not met the Iranian leader. Goodness, least likable. Tough call. No, the truth is the least likable, the least ability to have a conversation where you know that you're communicating was Xi Jinping. I thought you were going to say that. There was a facade there. There was a barrier there. There was an unwillingness to actually have a candid conversation. Even the leader of that country, at least in conversations with me, most often, although not always, but most often kind of just stuck to the talking points, didn't want to engage in a real communication, the kind of ways that one might actually bridge differences. With both Putin and Chairman Kim, we were able to break that down, actually have real conversations. I wasn't able to achieve that with Xi Jinping.
It's a fascinating comparison. Putin gave you the name I like the most, Tank Man. We might start asking your Secret Service detail to call you Tank Man. Quote, Tank Man saved our ass. We can work with the Russians. You want to tell that story? How Tank Man, that's you, Mike Pompeo, according to Putin, saved his ass?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, it's a good story from the book, Never Give an Inch. We were somewhere in the world, and I get a call from President Trump saying, Mike, you're not going to believe this, but I just got off the phone with Vladimir Putin. This is President Trump. He's about to issue a press release thanking you for saving Russian lives. And my first thought, you can imagine, I think this was 18, might have been 19. It would have been 18. I was still CIA director. And the first thing I thought is, oh my gosh, I'm going to get impeached too for having worked with the Russians. It flashed through my head for a moment. Then it struck me. I remembered that earlier in the week, we had provided some information to the Russian intelligence services that had permitted them to take down a terror plot in St. Petersburg. We'd provided that because it was the right thing to do. We'd provided that information also because I'm confident it saved American lives. There's always thousands of Americans traveling in St. Petersburg, or at least before the war there were. It's the kind of way we can work on counterterrorism operations, even with adversaries like Russia. We counted on them to provide us information. We gave it to them. They did the hard work on the ground, and then it was really something. Maybe 10, 15 minutes later, there's the press release with Vladimir Putin thanking Mike Pompeo personally and the CIA organizationally for having saved Russian lives.
Not long thereafter, the mercenaries come over the hill in Iraq or Syria, and the American forces mow them down like they're being mowed down in Ukraine. How do that doesn't actually make sense to someone who walks in on the one hand, they're thanking you for stopping a terrorist attack in St. Petersburg. On the other hand, the government of which you are a senior leader mows down the Wagner group in Syria. How do those two things meet up, Mr. Secretary?
The common thread is that where you can work together, you ought to. And on the things that really matter, you've got to defend them. And if you make a statement saying that you're going to defend something, you damn well better do it. You can't say if there's chemical weapons used in Syria, we're going to respond, and then when they do, not respond. This is what President Obama did. We had made clear to the Russians that this line, it was along the Euphrates River, that this line was impenetrable. There were Americans on the ground there. Their lives would be at risk if the Russians came across. And when they did, we made sure they didn't.
They were all dead. And nothing happened, by the way. That's the testament to deterrence. Nothing happened. Can I turn to Iran? This book will be fascinating to anyone who has watched the Ayatollahs and their mullah muggers, but I want people to be understanding. You are on their hit list. So is Brian Hook. So are a number of other Americans. So is President Trump. So is General Milley, Robert O'Brien. There's a long hit list. They are trying to kill Americans. Whether it's you or anybody else, Mr. Secretary, if they succeed, what should the administration do immediately?
First rule is make sure that they don't, right? And what you shouldn't do to make sure you have deterrence is sit down and negotiate a new nuclear deal with them. So give them resources, don't enforce sanctions. So we are putting, not my life in particular, although perhaps it is included, but we're putting American, European lives at risk with our Iran policy today. So an enormous mistake to have gone back to the weakness of President Obama. Goodness, I write about this in the book. The Clinton administration, when I think it was President Bush Sr. was threatened, made clear that an attempt to kill an American inside the United States will be met with force, and in fact was, as opposed to waiting until someone is harmed, injured, or killed inside the United States. Today, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said, gosh, if you do it, we'll take a strong response. I don't want to get into what the response options are, but make no mistake about it, the Iranians can see that the world changed on January 20th for them, and that they now have more power. And these protests haven't been supported. And the Iranian people, the people in our friend and partner Israel, are more at risk, and the American people are more at risk as well today.
And I get to actually talk on the air with a bunch of people I get to usually talk off air with. Starting with Dr. Michael Oren from Israel. Dr. Michael Oren, who you can read on Twitter at Dr. Michael Oren, or you can read his stuff over at michaeloren.com. Or you can get his great new novel, Swan's War, through michaeloren.com. But Michael joins us, former member of Israeli government. Michael, great to have you on the air with me. And I've got a bunch of stuff in our short time together. I want to get the latest on the Supreme Court fight, because just reading some of the Israeli papers, everybody seems to be angst-ridden over the end of days as we know it, which tells me it's got to be probably a pretty good thing. Jake Sullivan was in town. Anthony Blinken's coming to town. Tell me what the mood is about the Supreme Court and reforms there.
Well, first of all, great to be with you, Duane. This is the first time for us. We've been together for years. We've never really talked on air, I don't think. This is wonderful. Well, the Supreme Court issue goes to the heart of Israeli democracy. Whether there will be a judicial review, whether the Supreme Court will be able to strike down legislation passed by the Knesset, or whether the Knesset, by a simple majority of one, will be able to overrule rulings of the Supreme Court. And this has all sorts of ramifications for Israeli society. It also a strategic ramification for our relations with the United States. Jake Sullivan, as you said, was here, the National Security Advisor, and
Right.
Blinken is on his way. They're all bringing the same message. I mean, they're bringing many messages, but this is the message: is our common democratic values are a core pillar of our strategic alliance. You don't want to weaken it. You don't want to give more ammunition to the people in our party, the progressives who say that Israel is already not a democracy. Don't make it worse. And that's the message they've been giving. I think messages have come from Congress as well to the same effect. Within Israel itself, the Israeli public is divided. 110,000 people protesting up the street from me in Tel Aviv against the reforms. But people I know in my neighborhood, I'm in a blue-collar neighborhood, they think the reforms don't go far enough. They think that they should just dismantle the whole judicial system and start building it up again because it's thoroughly sort of corrupted.
That kind of sounds. It sounds kind of familiar to politics here in the States. About half and half.
No question about it.
Yeah.
No question about it. And I've said to Hugh in the past that the attack on the Supreme Court in the United States is now coming from the left, and Israel comes from the right.
Right.
Someone's going to be disgruntled all the time. There's no perfect formula here. I have advocated for a court which adopts part of the American system because in our system, the Supreme Court justices are nominated and approved by jurists themselves overwhelmingly, which means they basically stay in one place in terms of their worldview. I think that the political echelon here has to have a greater say in the nomination and election of Supreme Court justices. But we also should leave several positions for minorities. Otherwise, we'll never have an Arab judge, maybe not have an ultra-Orthodox judge. We're a different society in that way. But there has to be a reform. And the question is how far that reform is going to go. Netanyahu has been indicating to various visitors that the reforms that are now on the books that are being proposed in Knesset are not going to be what's going to be accepted, and there'll be some rollback. Let's hope so, because I believe that our democracy here is a strategic asset. It's the only way in which a society this divided, this fractured, can all get along and function. And frankly, Israel functions very, very highly.
Michael Oren, we were talking about the messaging aspect of this. A different kind of messaging seems to be going on at the same time. There are news reports that out of the Times of Israel that I'm reading this morning that Israel and the U.S. are kicking off massive war games in an apparent message to Iran. What do you know about that? And is that indeed what the signaling is going on?
That's the signaling. It's not the first time we've had war games, not the war games of this magnitude, quite large. It all comes against the background of two developments, or let's say even three. One, that the JCPOA, the negotiations to renew the JCPOA have stalled indefinitely. The Iranian regime is shooting its own people in the streets, particularly women in the streets who are protesting for freedom.
Yep.
And the United States and Iran are engaged in a proxy war in Ukraine, where Iranian missiles and drones are being used to kill American-backed Ukrainian soldiers. So that's a background. There's opportunity for cooperation. The Biden administration has indicated already, even leaking to the New York Times, that it's ready to discuss cooperation, particularly against the drone factories in Iran. So that, hence the level of cooperation at this magnitude. What we don't see, though, Duane, we don't see yet the United States willing to sell or even lease strategic bombers to the state of Israel. We have small bombers, F-35s, F-16s,
which I think is a big mistake.
Small payload.
Yeah.
We need a bomber that can carry a 50,000-pound bomb and flying at 50,000 feet, which the Iranians can't touch.
That's how you send a message. If everybody knows you have that, then that sends the message, right?
Yep.
30 seconds, very quickly. King Abdullah and Benjamin Netanyahu met. What do we take away from that meeting?
Well, I think the issue is the Temple Mount, and clearly there are going to be members of Netanyahu's government and others who are going to go up to the Temple Mount and pray, which is their right. It is not a violation of the status quo, but there is a Supreme Court ruling that says that organized Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount should not be held because that could be provocative and touch off a war. And Bibi is basically signaling to the king, we're going to keep adhering to that Supreme Court ruling.
Michael, thank you very much for doing that. We will have to do this again. Thank you, Hugh. Welcome back, America. Duane Patterson filling in for Hugh today and tomorrow. You can follow me over on Twitter at Radio Blogger. I have a new piece also that will be popping up on hotair.com in their VIP section. But the benefits of doing this job, at least producing it for the last 23 years, is the number of people I get to talk to off air normally that I now get to talk talk to on air. And one of those is one of the most reliable voices that you see in Washington. This is a guy that is a personal treat for me because whenever I see him on TV or have ever seen him on TV, I stop what I'm doing and turn the volume up because he is one of those guys you need to hear what he has to say. Byron York, the Washington Examiner chief political correspondent, joins me. Hello, Byron. Welcome to the Hugh Show.
Good morning, Duane. We can just have an off-air conversation on air.
We could. In fact, that's kind of what this is going to sound like, I think. I want to play for you, though, one of the most surreal, out-of-body, tone-deaf videos I think I have ever seen, certainly in the last few years, and that is the former chairman of the House Intel Committee, Adam Schiff, whining and complaining and doing the Sesame Street beaker routine on TikTok, the Communist Chinese Party app. Jacob, play cut 20 for Byron.
Hello, I'm Congressman Adam Schiff with some troubling news. Today, Kevin McCarthy removed me from the House Intelligence Committee, all for doing my job, for holding Trump accountable and standing up to the extreme MAGA Republicans. We knew it would be bad when the Republicans took over, but it's far worse than we expected. But I can promise you this is not the end of my fight for our democracy. This is just the beginning. Please join us and contribute today. Thank you.
Byron, I am no lawyer, but I've worked for one for 23 years. This sounds to me like admission against interest. What is he thinking?
I don't know. And, Eric Swalwell went to MSNBC to complain, to say that he's not going to remain silent here.
Threatening the speaker for apparently being threatened and endangering his life. It's upside down stuff.
Yeah, and look, the one thing about Capitol Hill is it is really true that what goes around comes around. And so the Democratic efforts or moves to discipline, to remove from committees Paul Gosar, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and then everything that happened around the January 6th committee, it was going to come back at him.
Of course.
And obviously you can say about Schiff that, well, all he did was lie about collusion, and members of Congress lie a lot. Maybe that could be his defense. Look,
colluded with the Russians about and lied about Trump colluding with the Russians.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He said that they had evidence. They had solid evidence of this that proved collusion, which obviously Robert Mueller, who had all the powers of law enforcement in a much more extensive investigation, could not establish that collusion ever took place. Now, as far as Swalwell is concerned, the relationship he had with a person who's probably a Chinese spy is actually much more troubling from an intelligence committee standpoint. And we haven't seen some of the evidence that McCarthy has seen. McCarthy's kind of teased that, if you saw what I saw, you really would think this is the absolute right thing to do. So Swalwell has his own problems here. But basically, this is just a case of what goes around comes around.
So in the White House, we had a little bit of turnover drama this week, minor, not anything too over the top. We have the Ron Klain departure, followed by the Jeff Zients reemergence into the Biden administration, formerly the COVID czar, and then kind of disappeared for a while, and now he's back as incoming chief of staff. The one thing that I note that you tweeted or retweeted about this morning over at Byron York on Twitter is that Jeff Zients has a boatload of gold as an investment. Now, while we're not against gold investments here on the Hugh Hewitt Show because we have a fine sponsor in Birch Gold, but my gracious, what does, as you say on Twitter, what does that say about his economic outlook?
It was really weird, and I got this. Sean Davis at the Federalist tweeted this, although it had been reported earlier when Zients joined the White House. But you do these financial disclosure statements, and they don't force you to say exactly how much money you have. It gives you ranges so that you say, well, I've got retirement account, and it has between $50,000 and $100,000.
Right.
Well, one range for people who are doing better than that is between $1 and $5 million. Another range is between $5 and $25 million. So Jeffrey Zients reports having between $1 million and $5 million in gold bars.
That's a big range.
Wow, it's a big range. But that's a lot of gold.
That's a lot of gold. Yes.
So he has gold bars. I don't whatever. And then the interesting thing is beyond that, he reported investing in 2 gold-based funds, and he had between $5 million and $25 million in each one. So he had $1 to $5 million in gold bars, and he had between $10 and $50 million in gold funds. So you have to think. I mean, people invest a lot in gold because they think the economy is going to go to hell. They think inflation is just going to take over and run rampant.
Right.
It's a move to safety.
It's a hedge, right? Yeah.
Yeah, for some people, and I think it's unusual to see in a public official this much gold. And I'm just curious. I mean, is this guy a prepper, or I mean, does he think everything's going to go crazy? I don't know, but he is going to be the White House chief of staff.
And again, I'm not passing judgment on his financial investment decisions at all. There's no problem with investing in gold. We advise people to do part of that all the time. I guess my question, just out of intellectual curiosity, would be, so what's his net worth? So whatever his investment in gold, what percent of that is that to his total wealth? Are we doing a 50-50 split here, or is this really a 5% and he's like a mega wealthy guy?
Well, I didn't add it all up, but I did point out the gold bars part, $1 to $5 million, is a relatively small part of his portfolio. He's an alumnus of Bain Capital, right? Which is everybody associates with Mitt Romney.
Sure.
And as a matter of fact, Romney has said good things about Zients, a fellow Bain guy. Although there should be some political differences between a Republican senator and the Democratic White House chief of staff.
Yes.
You would kind of hope that. But anyway, so it's not. I'm describing these enormous numbers: 1 to 5 million, or 50 to 100 million. Or 5 to 50, 10 to 50 million, these enormous numbers, but they're still not the majority or even a huge part of his portfolio. But still, I mean, it's just a lot of money.
It is. Last thing, we have about, I think, a minute left, not a ton of time, but I want to cover what you were writing in the Examiner yesterday, and that is the Biden administration reversed their policy. We're going to arm Ukraine with tanks. They want more. They want fighter jets as well, but we're going ahead and give them some M1 Abrams, about 31 of them. But there is a cost to arming them, and that cost is our own readiness, as you put in the Washington Examiner. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I was writing about a new report that's come out from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. And basically it's showing that the United States arms industry, manufacturing weapons and munitions, the United States has kind of been underprepared for years, and now sending all these weapons to Ukraine has really exposed how deeply unprepared we are. They did some war games about a possible U.S. conflict with China over Taiwan and concluded that we would run out of some critical ammunition within a week of it starting. And we found that other supplies are low on Javelin missiles, Stinger missiles, and artillery shells because we've sent so much to Ukraine.
Sheds new light on debt ceiling negotiations and our need for defense spending and all that stuff. Watch Byron York on Fox News. Read him at the Washington Examiner. Get updates at Byron York on Twitter. Byron, thanks for joining me. I have probably solved, along with my following guest, off air, the entire world's problems, probably at least a couple of dozen times over the last few years. At least that's how our phone conversations go off air. We'll see how we do on air in this 6 minutes. I'm joined by Jim Talent, former Missouri Senator and of the Bipartisan Policy Center, a good friend of the program and a good friend of mine. Jim, welcome back to the show. Good to have you on with me for a change. Oh, you're muted. We'll get you off mute here in just a second, hopefully.
Okay.
There you are. Okay, you're back. I got you.
People like me better when I'm muted. Yeah, we have solved the problems, Duane. So how come they persist? I mean, I don't understand it.
I blame Adam Schiff entirely. Look, your senator Josh Hawley is Tuesday night at a gathering. Said he's going to introduce a bill to ban the TikTok app in the United States, a move that I wholeheartedly endorse and support and wish it would take hold. At the same time, the recently deposed chairman of the House Select Committee on Intel, Adam Schiff, goes onto TikTok last night to fundraise and whine because he got booted off of House Intel by Kevin McCarthy. Jim,
Yes.
What do you make of that?
There are always ironies to comfort us, aren't there, Duane? Yeah,
Aren't there?
We all know TikTok is an agent for the Chinese government to penetrate networks.
Spy, to gather intelligence.
Americans,
Yes.
exactly. And here a fellow's going on TikTok to complain that he's not on the Intel committee. You really can't make it up. I have an old friend who says you got to laugh or cry in situations like this. No, look, I mean, it's not as I said to you about a month ago, this back and forth about taking people off committees, although, Schiff abused the processes of the committee, which is a separate thing. This is not an ideal solution. The better custom is to allow the minority to pick its own members of the committee because it's an internal matter and they should have control over internal matters. But customs have to be customary. Norms have to be normal. And if the other side is not going to follow them and they want to go into the law of the jungle, then that's basically what you have to do when you take control.
There has to be a price paid for what Nancy Pelosi did.
But you can't run a body where you're the leader of one party and when the other side is in, they do things to you. And they won't admit that was wrong, and they won't say they're not going to do it again. And then when you get in, you respect the norms. I mean, that just doesn't work. So I think this is probably the least McCarthy could do under the circumstances. And, let's hope that we get back to a situation where the parties are able to control their own committee members because the House will work better, and I think the people will be served better.
Do you have any prospects that Hakeem Jeffries will sit down and meet with Kevin McCarthy and hammer out some kind of a deal like, okay, you got us, you got even, let's strike a peace here?
I think what McCarthy is handling this in a smart fashion because, you see what he's done with the Select Committee on China. Where
yes.
He and Gallagher both have moved, I think, very effectively to make that bipartisan. So if you have one area, and bipartisan doesn't mean anybody that you stop fighting or you don't have your convictions. It just means you respect the legitimate rights of the other side. So if you get that in one area of policy or activity for the House, then you have a building block to move to other areas. So, and Jeffries is new. He can chart his own course. And I have no doubt that McCarthy is trying to talk to him. And I suspect that Jeffries is at least having some discussions about this. I'd like to see it. We can do everything we want to do. In fact, do it better and more effectively, running the House in a way that respects everybody's rights.
I agree with that. Jim Talent, as long as we're talking about committees and how they're kind of staffed, we started to get that news this week of who's going to be on what committees. I had to get a smile on my face because the irony bug bit in the weaponization committee, select committee of Jim Jordan. You look way at the bottom of Republicans of who's going to be on that committee, and at the very end of that, there is a at-large Congress critter from Wyoming named Hegeman who replaced somebody recently that was from that state. Who did she replace again? Cheney, wasn't it?
Yeah, and so now she's on this committee, and it's a really important committee. I'm glad they're doing it.
Of course it is.
I say this as a person who I think Duane. I'm still a very strong supporter of robust intelligence collection and a strong supporter of the Bureau during my time in office.
Sure.
But it's really clear that the top levels of the Bureau have been politicized and compromised, and this is exactly something that the House needs to do. I mean, going back to the baseless investigation of Trump for the Russia stuff, based on a memo they knew was false. Okay, to the suppression of the Hunter laptop, what the Twitter files have shown.
Yep.
The Bureau is getting involved directly involved in partisan politics in the guise of domestic counterterrorism and police activity, and that simply cannot be permitted. And what I would like to see Jordan do is say, look, this committee is going to operate in the service of the truth. We're going to follow the facts wherever they go, and we're going to let the chips fall where they may. And we're going to find out the truth, and we're going to document it. And I think if he does that, it could be a very important effort.
From your lips, Jim Talent of the Bipartisan Policy Center, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah,
Read everything
good.
at Jim Talent on Twitter and at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Duane Patterson in for Hugh, back after the top of the hour break. But we got one of the first looks at it, and Hugh read it cover to cover, spent a long time with him. Here is another section of that interview from a very important memoir, Never Give an Inch. Jacob.
I'm very glad that Secretary Blinken and Jake Sullivan have worked with you and the other people who've been targeted, not named Trump, because he has Secret Service protection, but they are providing protection to the Americans who've been targeted. But I don't know that they've communicated with the Iranians that it would be catastrophic for them to do this. And I would that is what Clinton did to Saddam. He sent a message when we found out that Saddam was trying to kill HW that could not be missed. Do you think that clarity has been communicated to the Iranians yet?
Well, first, I want to thank not only Secretary Blinken and National Security Advisor Sullivan for providing protection for me and the others who are at risk. I want to thank folks on Capitol Hill, both bipartisan. They've done good work doing the right thing to protect lots of us, former military folks who were involved in the strike on Soleimani as well. I don't know what they've communicated precisely. I hope they've communicated in the strongest possible terms that is unacceptable, not only to harm an American, but to threaten one.
Okay, let's move to the thing that will get the blob most excited. I mean, you're really going to have hell rain down on you because you said a nice thing about MBS. Not MBZ, MBS, Saudi Crown Prince Salman. And they're going to blow up because of Khashoggi. And you write about it at length. But you are also Mr. Realpolitik. So what should the American people understand about Saudi Arabia and their crown prince, who will be their ruler for probably 50 to 60 years if the actuarial tables hold?
Goodness. There's a bunch. Let's start with the first rule that I talk about in Never Give an Inch. The mission said is to protect America, right? We have lots of issues around the world. We've talked about making religious freedom in China more capable, where we want good things for the Iranian people. The very first mission is to protect America. We shorthanded it America first. With respect to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they are an incredibly important security partner for the United States. And we need to make sure we never forget that. When it all goes to heck, when there are problems in the Middle East tomorrow or 2 or 5 years from now, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will be our partner and the Iranians will be on the other side. You can write it down. And so we should never mistake these two places. And this is what this administration got backwards. They said Mohammed bin Salman would be a pariah and sat down with the Iranian negotiators. That is just insane. So first rule, know who your friends are. Make sure you stay close to them. When Jamal Khashoggi was murdered in Turkey, we knew that this was completely unacceptable. This was indecent and immoral. And folks who did it needed to be held accountable. We did that. I think I sanctioned some 13 people from the kingdom. I then, in very short order, encouraged the president, and he made clear that we were going to stick with the kingdom, that we were going to be good partners alongside of them. And then I traveled there to meet with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, both to speak to him privately about our disappointment, our disgust at what had taken place in Turkey, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, but also to make clear we were going to continue to stay alongside them to provide security for the American people and for their region. That combination, Hugh, had enormous impact in the world. Not just even in the Middle East. I think it reduced the risk that we're going to have to send 20, 40, 60,000 Americans to fight and die there someday. But the whole world saw that. This is a set of cats that are different in Washington, D.C. They're going to stick with their friends. When there's tough times, they will be alongside of them. They're not going to just walk away because some knucklehead at the Washington Post wants to write nasty things about them. And it made sure our adversaries saw it, our friends saw it. And then I'll close with this. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia today is far better off as a result of the leadership of Mohammed bin Salman than it would have been with anyone else. He is working to bring that nation towards modernity. And there are going to be days we're going to shake our heads and we're not going to like it and they're not going to move as fast as we'd like. But I'll give you this concrete idea. I'll give the American people this concrete idea. If you had a daughter in Saudi Arabia today, she was 8, 10, 12, 15 years old, you would be hopeful that Mohammed bin Salman would continue to be empowered to make the progress towards modernity that nation has made in the past 5 years. I'm counting on him to continue to do it. He has great friends in the Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed and others who will work alongside him to help him achieve that. The best interest of the United States of America is to make sure that we never lose our connectivity to the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Kuwaitis, the Saudis, who will be our good security partners, protecting us not only from threats in the Middle East, terror coming from Iran or from Lebanon or from Yemen, but also working with us against the challenge of the century, the Chinese Communist Party.
Or terror coming to us from Afghanistan. Last substantive thing, I want to do a couple of personal topics and politics, but I want to talk about Afghanistan. In detail, you lay out the peace process, what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, the picture that's gone all around the world with you and the Taliban guy. That's not what was going on. Is there any doubt in your mind, because I have no doubt at the end of Never Give an Inch, Donald Trump would not have left Afghanistan the way Joe Biden did?
I'm very confident of that, Hugh. And my best evidence, the evidence I'd put forth to the American people is we didn't. For 4 years, President Trump wanted out of Afghanistan. He campaigned on it. And so we worked tirelessly to create the conditions where we could do that, where we could achieve that objective. Sign me up for reducing our footprint anywhere in the world when we can do so safely. But we never got to a place where we could go in and walk in and tell the president, and I never did, yes, sir, we can get out of Afghanistan, every whip stitch, every last uniformed soldier, and still achieve our objectives. Not only getting out, but reducing risk of attack from Afghanistan, getting all the Americans home, getting our equipment home. I could never tell him that. And so we didn't. We got down from about 15,000 to about 2,500. And the president, you know President Trump, he would rail, let's get out, we got to go. And when we walked him through the risk set, he would always say, go as fast as you can. And the negotiations that I was part of were the beginning of what would have been a 2, 5, 10-year process to try and create the conditions on the ground that were appropriate to do what President Biden ultimately did, which was to take the last American out. And the tragedy was that he didn't have the patience for that, to protect what we had done there for 20 years. He got 13 Americans killed. He left Americans there, which has never been done before. And I am convinced that President Trump would have never put America in a place where that kind of debacle would have happened. And the whole world can see the difference between what we did and what Secretary Blinken and his team did.
We will pick up and conclude that interview with Mike Pompeo tomorrow on the show with me guest hosting for Hugh. Hope you join us for that. Great book, great memoir, Never Give an Inch, over at Amazon.com. You should pick up a copy today if you haven't already done so. It's that important of a book.